I want to share some thoughts about leeward marks and windward marks. So the first thing you have to do before the mark rounding, well before the mark rounding starts, is to have a plan for the next leg. It doesn't have to be detailed, but when you're approaching a leeward mark, you need to know whether you're planning to tack at the end, and if someone rounds the mark inside of you, is that okay? Are you willing to sail all the way out to the right? Or is it very important that you close the door on that person? You don't let them in between you and the mark. So those are things that have to be in the back of your head, and things that'll help you make that decision, whether you want to go to the right or the left, maybe what worked best on the last upwind, or maybe on this downwind, you noticed that there was more wind on one side or the other, or you noticed a shift, for example. So the plan has to come first, because that's going to affect your mark rounding. Next up are rule situation. And by that, I'm mainly referring to whether or not you have inside overlap on the boat in front of you, and whether the boat behind you has inside overlap on you. So those little battles come in, and then close to the 3 boat length circle, it's all decided, and often that is punctuated with putting the centerboard down. Boom, no room. So you want to turn around, look at the other person in the eye if you can, maybe even read their sail number off. But yeah, no room, Denmark, no room, Mora, whoever the person is. Or I have room, or there's only room for 2 people. So I could have written the communication in there, but rules is sums that up. Then you put the centerboard down. As you're sailing through the 3 boat length circle, put on your upwind outhaul and your upwind Cunningham. Unless it's very windy, you may need to add more Cunningham when you're already going upwind, but try to get your outhaul and Cunningham done. If it's very windy, you don't want to put your whole kicker on if you're going to jibe, because that puts the power off to the side of the boat. If you have a lot of kicker, all the power's out here. So if you're going to jibe around, that's going to load up and it's going to catch the water as the boat tips. Because the boom's pulled down by the kicker, it's going to catch the water and the boat's going to tip. So yeah, I recommend pulling a good amount of kicker on, and if it's windy, that's not enough. But if it's light wind, you can get all of your kicker on before the mark. So the brown color coding is for things that you can do if you have time. Now, if you are not on the right jibe, you jibe after doing all this, because the jibe can become part of the rounding. So you can jibe and start sheeting in as the sail comes over, and then the sail fills, you keep on sheeting, and it's the heel that you want to drive the turn. So you don't want to be turning by jamming the tiller over. You want to be turning by heeling the boat over. So if you think of the sail as like a paddle, sail as the power of the boat, if you paddle on this side of the boat turns that way. If you paddle on that side of the boat turns that way. So if we're looking down on this boat and there's a mark right here, this boat wants to lean over this way so that the sail is driving it around. On the opposite side, if this is a windward mark, well, that doesn't really make sense. If this is a windward mark and the wind's coming from the top of the board, what I saw quite a bit of last week was people fighting to get their main sheet loose, fighting to get their sail controls off, and the boat's heeling to leeward. So when the boat's heeling to leeward, it actually wants to round up. So you have to really fight it with the rudder. So instead of doing that, you want the boat to be completely flat or even heeled to windward. If you can heel the boat to windward, it's going to be powered down, and then it can sail downwind. So playing around with where the position is, where the power in the boat is by what the heel of the boat is. So heel is the key here. And then sheeting to keep the sail working as you turn, and steering follows the sheeting and heel. In a light wind leeward mark rounding, again, this is a top view. If you lean the boat over, you can spend the rest of the mark rounding flattening that boat out. So it's not about like keeping the boat heeled over, and then flattening at the end. You want to heel the boat at first, and then as you flatten the boat, the back edge of the sail especially fills, and that helps drive the boat through. So you're adding power to the boat as it turns by flattening through the rounding. Heel, sheet, steer, flatten. And then if you have decided, so if this is a normal mark to port rounding, and you've decided you want to go that way, you want to be able to tack right out of the rounding. Now if you do a poor rounding and another person rounds inside of you, this person prevents you from tacking into them. Even though you would be tacking onto starboard, you have to allow this boat room to keep clear. So you can't suddenly appear as the starboard boat. So if you want to tack right out of the mark, you have to round that mark very closely so that you can tack without interfering with the boat behind you. So not every mark rounding will you have a tack, obviously, and that comes back to your plan. Next up, get the boat going fast. I wrote hike, but if it's light wind, you don't need to hike, but you do need to get the boat settled. It's more important that the boat is settled and sailing fast than that you get the fine tuning done. What I mean by that is if you're leaning in to change sail controls, your boat isn't going at full speed. So first get the boat going as fast as it will go, and then finish off the boom vang if it's heavy wind, or fine tune the vang, outhaul, and Cunningham if you didn't get them right at the beginning. So that takes us to the Windward Mark, and it's not quite the same. Planning is still very important, especially because if you barely make a mark, it's going to be very hard to do a jibe out of it. It's a lot nicer to come in on a generous ley line if you want to go to this side. If you're rounding marks to port and you want to go to this side of the course, coming in on a generous ley line makes it easier. So that means that your plan ideally should be made early enough, like made even before you get to the ley line, so you know whether you need to be generous on the ley line or whether you can get away with shooting up into the wind and just barely making it around. Sometimes shooting up and just making it around is a good tactic if you have another boat that's trying to tack to your leeward. If you're low on your ley line, no one's going to try to get in here. They'll duck you and come behind you. So again, the plan's super important. If you find yourself on the ley line with quite a bit of time, maybe you're on a good ley line, you're not worried that you're not going to make the mark, you basically have some time to think. One of the things you need to do is look down at your hiking strap and see whether the main sheet is tangle. Does the main sheet go over the hiking strap? Does it go around your feet? Untangle all of that. You could even flake a little bit of main sheet out onto the deck so that you're ready with at least one handful, because you can get to the Windward Mark, and if you can't let your mainsail out, everyone behind you passes you. It's like your race is on pause while you untie those knots. So untying the main sheet is an important thing to do if you have time. Check it over. If you have a bad ley line and you can only just make it around the mark, shooting the mark comes first. And while you're shooting up into the wind to try to make it around that mark, you release the kicker. You use the leech of the boat. So when you pull on the kicker, you use the leech of the boat to shoot up into the wind. But once you're shooting up into the wind, having a hooked leech with a lot of kicker actually creates more drag in the sail. So after you've started shooting up into the mark, you can release the boom bang, release the kicker, and that makes less resistance in the sail as you shoot up into the wind. If you have time, whether you're on your ley line or you're doing a really extreme shoot up into the wind, you can also take your Cunningham off. I recommend doing that. If you have time and you're high on your ley line, you can also release your outhaul, but be very careful about releasing your outhaul because you can't point as high anymore. So if you're coming into the mark up here, you might think of releasing your outhaul, but if you're coming into the mark right on the ley line, don't release your outhaul because you may suddenly not make the mark. So just be careful about whether or not to release your outhaul. If you're coming in on port, you would tack after releasing the kicker, because it's very important the kicker comes off. And then you're into the actual mark rounding. So at the Windward Mark, as you bear away, the thing that stops you from bearing away if it's windy is your main sheet not coming out. So I put sheeting first. So sheeting, letting the sail out, whether it's heavy wind or light wind, letting the sail out causes the boat to lean backwards, and causing the boat to, okay, what are we doing? We're coming around the mark like this. If you let the sail out, the boat rolls to windward, and that roll to windward puts the power out here in the sail and causes the boat to turn downwind. So by letting the sail out, you roll the boat, which turns the boat. So letting the sail out turns the boat if you allow the boat to rock. Sheet heel, and then the steering just follows that. So you want to lead with the sheeting and heeling and follow with the steering. If you had decided that you need to jibe right out of the mark, you continue to heel the boat until you go through the jibe, and then you flatten it out. If this is a wavy venue, you've got big waves that you can surf, you might be able to jibe right onto a wave. Maybe you're not jibing, but catching a wave is still more urgent than anything else. If your kicker isn't right, that is, you might need your kicker to catch the wave, but hopefully your kicker is pretty close because you've done it up here. If it's totally loose and you don't have a maximum off, this might be more a higher priority. But yeah, so try to catch that wave, and once you're on the wave, then you can fix your kicker, fix your Cunningham, fix your outhaul, pull your centerboard up, and then get back on again, and hopefully you haven't lost the wave yet. Unfortunately, we don't have big waves that we can surf here. So we can skip this orange one. So we sheet, heel, steer. Once we finished our rounding, make sure the kicker's right, because that's the most important sail control on the downwind. You want that bouncing leech. And then you really don't want any Cunningham wrinkles on the downwind. Any of those creases, they stop the nice shape of the sail. They just bunch all of that fabric up at the luff of the sail. So often uncleating the Cunningham isn't enough. You often have to go to the sail and pull up on the Cunningham to make sure it's totally released. And the outhaul is more important than you think. If the outhaul is loose, the leech, the battens, hook a little bit more, and then they bounce more nicely. If this whole sail is flat, because the bottom is totally flat, those I find it harder to get those, get your leech to get those battens to flick open nicely. And then the least important thing, the last thing to do, is the centerboard. If you are rocking and rolling and doing kinetics and catching waves and changing directions, the centerboard can be quite low down. In the 90s and 2000s, people sailed with very high centerboards because they weren't being as dynamic on the downwind. So if you're going in a straight line and not shifting your weight very much, it makes sense to have the centerboard a bit higher. But I challenge you to put your centerboard down a bit further than you're used to, and then use that grip in the water. Be a little bit more dynamic. When a puff hits, press the boat flat with that grip in the water. When the puff dies, let the boat lean over again. So always sort of working the boat flatter or more heeled. Yeah, so the big thing that I want you to think about with mark roundings is don't lead with the rudder. You want to lead with the tilt of the boat. So if we change our perspective for a second, this boat is going to want to turn that way. This boat is going to want to turn that way, right? It's because the power, the sail is driving the boat. So if you push on this side, the boat turns that way. If you push on this side, the boat turns that way. So I want you to try to turn around the marks using the heel of the boat.